All right, so we've been keeping up with Israel's ongoing assault in the Gaza Strip, and as the days go on, the civilian body count continues to pile up. Dozens of children have been killed so far. The overwhelming majority of those who have been killed so far in these airstrikes have been civilians, and yet it continues and it continues. And one of the more recent examples of a potential war crime that Israel committed was the complete obliteration of an office/residential building that happened to house news outlets like the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, among many others. And it seemed to me, at least, at face value, reading the situation, that the intention of this was clear. It was to target journalists, it was to target the media so that they would have a reduced capacity to cover the atrocities that are happening on the ground. But still, we had to ask some basic follow-up questions from the IDF. Obviously, the IDF is not a trustworthy source, as we're going to get to in a minute here. They've brazenly lied multiple times, even just in this recent conflict alone, not to mention their history of lying. I mean, trusting the IDF at face value is like trusting the CIA at face value. It's completely ridiculous and nobody should do it. But still, we had to ask basic follow-up questions like, hey, do you have any evidence that Hamas was using this building that you just obliterated to some great advantage that would warrant completely destroying it? And so we got articles in response like this one that said, Israel showed the U.S. the smoking gun on Hamas in AP office tower. So originally, the AP came out with their official statement and they said, we've been operating in this building for over a decade. We've never seen any evidence of Hamas or anything close to it operating outside of this building. And so there was no real evidence that anyone was aware of. And this is what they're coming out and saying confidently. We've already showed the U.S. believes it. And by the way, I wouldn't even believe this if it was necessarily true. Because again, both the United States and the IDF and Israel have a clear vested interest in lying about these things in order to justify the ongoing campaign of violence. But even then, we still don't have any concrete evidence. And not only do we not have any concrete evidence that they're not willing to share with us here, they say Israel shared intelligence with the U.S. showing how Hamas operated inside the same building with the Associated Press and Al Jazeera in Gaza, officials in Jerusalem said on Sunday. Officials in more than one government office confirmed that U.S. President Joe Biden's phone call to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Saturday was, in part, about the bombing of the building, and that Israel showed Biden and American officials the intelligence behind the actions. So, seems pretty clear. They say they've got the smoking gun. So, do they actually have the smoking gun? Well, thanks to our friend Ken Klippenstein here, he says, I just asked the Biden administration if they could confirm Israel's claim that it shared intelligence showing Hamas operated in the same building as the Associated Press and Al Jazeera. Their response, no comment. Another response we had here, multiple people, multiple U.S. officials saying, no, we don't have anything like that. And most recently, breaking, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he has not seen any Israeli evidence of Hamas operating in Gaza office building that Israel destroyed in an airstrike. The building housed the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, among other media outlets. So, listen, if Antony Blinken is not coming out and confirming this, that means they don't have any fucking evidence. Both the United States and the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, have a clear and vested interest because they don't like the negative press that they have been getting for doing this. They have a clear interest in releasing the information, the evidence, the so-called evidence that they have as quickly as possible. Because if they get that information out to everybody, then those press outlets would then begin the process of justifying this, even though, again, I don't think it's justified under any circumstances because this is mostly civilian infrastructure and Gaza already has obliterated infrastructure in general. And so displacing tens of thousands of people from their homes in this bombing campaign is not justified by saying, oh, maybe we took out some slight Hamas intelligence operations. But even then, if Blinken is saying that they don't have evidence, then they don't have fucking evidence. Because if they did, they would immediately be selling this to everyone around the world in order to get the press off of their backs, in order to get this ongoing criticism off of their backs. So they obviously don't have evidence for this, and they obviously lied blatantly. And that's not even the only example of them lying in the recent days. So this was just a couple days ago. A press corps deceived, and the Gaza invasion that wasn't. A spokesman led the international media to believe that Israeli forces had entered Gaza. They hadn't, but the army wanted Hamas to think they had. So the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, straight up lied to U.S. media, straight up lied to Western media, saying that they were doing a ground invasion so that the media would then go and report that they were doing a ground invasion, and then that Hamas would then go and enter these tunnels that they have to confront the Israeli invasion forces, which, you know, I'm not a defender of Hamas. Hamas is a straight up terrorist group. I don't defend Hamas in any capacity, but this is what they're doing to justify these actions. And if you know anything about the power balance between Hamas and Israel, it's not even fucking comparable. So as bad as Hamas is, the damage that they are able to inflict on civilians in Israel versus the damage that Israel is able to inflict on the civilians in Gaza, these are not two comparable things, okay? The death toll has been like 10 to 1 so far, if not more, in this ongoing conflict, as they're calling it. But again, this is not the only instance of the IDF lying. And so in response to the IDF being busted now for multiple brazen lies, what does Joe Biden do? Does he come out and try to hold them responsible? Does he call them out for killing innocent men, women, and children? Does he do any of that? Even put the mildest pressure on Israel to halt the illegal settlements and the displacement of Palestinians from their homes in East Jerusalem? Does he bring up any of these things? No. In fact, criminal complicity, outrage as Biden pushes $735 million weapons sale to Israel amid Gaza slaughter. Quote, approving more weapons to Israel would add fuel to the fire and would only embolden Israel to continue its bombardments in Gaza. So this is where your tax dollars are going, okay? Human rights advocates warned Monday that the Biden administration is deepening U.S. complicity in the Netanyahu regime's ongoing massacre of civilians in Gaza by attempting to push through a $735 million sale of so-called precision-guided weapons to Israel. The thing that I find ridiculous about this precision-guided missile situation is, Hamas doesn't have the military capacity to even use precision-guided missiles at all. So when you criticize Hamas for indiscriminately attempting to bomb civilians in Israel, it's a fair criticism, but you also have to understand they don't even have the capacity to send precision-guided missiles. When Israel does have the capacity to send precision-guided missiles, and still they are killing civilians a majority of the time. So that's not, people bring this up as if it's like, a hit on Hamas versus Israel, when in reality, it just shows you that Israel is intentionally killing civilians overwhelmingly. But continuing on, the Washington Post reported Monday that the Biden administration officially notified Congress of the sale on May 5th, just days before Israeli forces began their latest bombardment in Gaza last week, an assault that has killed nearly 200 Palestinians, wounded more than 1,200, and displaced tens of thousands. Since last Monday, the Israeli military has used bombs and missiles made by major U.S. military contractors such as Boeing and General Dynamics to obliterate major buildings in Gaza, including, obviously, the building that we were just talking about. Quote, criminal complicity. Youssef Munayyer, a Palestinian-American writer and political analyst, tweeted in response to the reports of the sale. So here's the bombs that they're talking about. A case study in U.S. complicity in Israel's massacre on Gaza. Al Jazeera investigation reveals GBU-31 and GBU-39 and MK-84 bombs are being dropped on Gaza. All three of these weapons are made by American companies. So this is the U.S. military-industrial complex in action. This is Joe Biden, a complete blanketed defense of Israel with absolutely no mention of the Palestinian people and the suffering that Israel is inflicting upon them. Really, Joe Biden and his administration's stance up until this point has been that the Palestinian people simply don't exist, that they don't deserve the same rights that Israel has to defend themselves. This is a complete power discrepancy. You have on the one side Palestinian people in Gaza who are basically living in the world's largest open-air prison. They have their water modulated by Israel, who are basically giving them ridiculously low amounts of water that is not enough for humans to live on. They don't have any sustainable jobs. There's like over 50% unemployment now. And keep in mind, almost 50% of the civilians in Gaza are children. And still, they are just indiscriminately bombing civilian infrastructure. They are bombing people's homes. They are bombing... there have been reports of them bombing schools or about to bomb schools. At least I saw reports of that. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. This is where we're at. Joe Biden administration absolutely standing on the side of the Israelis in this conflict. And it's really just a one-sided slaughter. And that's all you can say about it. Joe Biden, his administration, the military-industrial complex, obviously this is just a continuation of that project, and they're profiting off of an ethnic cleansing. That's what this is. It's a genocide. Call it a genocide. Call it an ethnic cleansing. This is what Joe Biden is not only not mentioning and not talking about and not acknowledging, but is actively supporting, not just complicit, but is actively supporting and giving the green light for Israel to continue their indiscriminate bombing campaign in Gaza, where they are, again, killing an overwhelming majority innocent civilians. So this absolutely is ridiculous. It has to stop. We as American citizens can only do so much, obviously, but we have to continue putting pressure on the government because this type of shit is absolutely unacceptable.